Surely by now you've heard that The Green Knight is a very good movie, and now it's my job to explain to you why that is.
I don't know what to say.
Now, by this point, I'm sure everybody has heard the phrase that every story has already been written and that everything is sort of a retread of an older idea or concept. And typically, when you look at stories that originate from around the time of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight in the 14th century or so in England, or even before that with Greek mythology, so on and so forth, you see stories that generally revolve around one of two concepts. Either a hero who's on a quest to find something, typically it's an item, but usually that's just an allegory for them finding a characteristic, whether it be pride or temperance or honor. Or the other type of story you would typically see is a classic tragedy in which a character futilely goes about this path, ultimately doomed by a characteristic they cannot escape. And in many ways, The Green Knight is a successful film because it is both of these stories in one. Now, on its face, the story is about a Sir played by Dev Patel who essentially enters into a game with the titular Green Knight, who is sort of this tree-constructed, like wood knight that comes out of nowhere on Christmas into this castle with King Arthur and says,
I want to play a game.
one of your sirs or knights may strike me, and then in a year I will return to strike them with a blow matching that which they strike today. Dev Patel, being a young and not particularly wise sir, hops to the task and ultimately beheads the knight, who is largely unfazed. Terrifying sight when you realize that you have one receipt coming your way a year later. The film picks up about a year later, where Dev Patel is preparing to take a 6-night journey up north to find the Green Knight and receive his comeuppance. Now, along the way, of course, are a series of smaller stories that are essentially tests for Sir Gawain, whether it may be temperance with the lady of a castle, whether it may be about truthfulness, or whether it's just about helping a lady find her decapitated head. It's a little more romantic than it sounds, romantic in the traditional sense, not in the lovey-dovey sense, because, you know, she's dead and has no head. But the film flows very smoothly from story to story, keeping you engaged in a very immersive world. And as the entire movie is really a setup for the final few minutes, how a person behaves at their end, much like in life, I want to talk more about the qualities of that journey and less about the story at this point, because, I mean, obviously a good story is only part of a great film. Now, in this case, I mentioned the word immersion, and immersion is a huge component of a period piece, which this definitely is in the medieval times, not the restaurant. But also immersion is really big when it comes to fantasy or science fiction or anything of that nature. What I find so interesting about this movie is its ability to immerse the audience by going right up to the threshold of several concepts. One being that fantasy divide. So for people like me who don't particularly enjoy stories about elves and such, there's enough fantasy to create a sense of otherworldliness. Again, like a Greek myth where you kind of accept things, but there's not so much going on that you feel like you need to have a 2,000-page tome to understand the lore of everything, to understand why things are happening and the origin of certain creatures. Similarly, The Green Knight has an air of maturity about it that also walks up to a threshold. This is a movie that ultimately knows what it wants to be in every facet. It's a grown-up fairy tale without being a fairy tale for adults. And I think that the overall message of the film is really timely without being really apparent and blunt and overly obvious, like, say, The Purge. With The Green Knight, the film is ultimately, from my perspective anyway, about dignity and honor, projected outwardly, in other words, doing good things, but also honor existing within thyself. In a way, the idea that this film exposits about sort of a chivalrous honor and dignity is almost closer to like a Zen honor and dignity. You know, seeing the into the void and not being afraid when it stares back, knowing that when you see yourself, you need not be afraid. The entire pursuit Dev Patel is on in this film is to not be a coward. And the final few minutes of this film is a wonderful exemplar of what cowardice means, not just to your own lack of growth, but in turning you into a toxic person to those around you. You can't be a leader if you don't have courage. This film also explores the dynamics of what it is to to be a decent person, whether it's going out and trying to assist a headless woman without the promise of a reward, whether it's trying to go into combat without cheating in said combat, or whether it's just facing the music when your time is up. All of these components make the Green Knight resonant, memorable, and it tells a moral tale in a way that seems so very familiar without feeling like a complete retread in any way, shape, or form, and also without bashing you over the head with what it's trying to say. I also want to point out that for anybody who complains that Dev Patel would never have been a Sir at this point of time in England because of his ethnicity, that is the dumbest complaint I think anybody could ever utter. If the film started by saying this is a scientifically accurate, sociologically accurate recreation of, the year 1430 AD in England, sure, you can have a gripe at that point. But it's a movie. It's a movie with witchcraft. It's a movie with magic and an evil knight made of tree bark. It's kind of like when people were saying, well, I liked the new Dawn of the Dead, but the zombies ran, and that's dumb. I think the problem scientifically was that there were zombies. So to anybody out there complaining that there are people other than just pasty white folks in this film, you need to really expand your worldview, because that's tragic. And it's mostly tragic because Dev Patel gives a great performance, and his career, his evolution has been really interesting to watch. And this is just reaffirmation that the time that's been put into him growing from, even TV like The Newsroom, where he was just a small intern there, to being a leading man in a medieval pseudo-action, pseudo-fantasy film. I mean, it's pretty impressive to watch, and you really enjoy watching a young actor come into their own. Ultimately, however, the bulk of the praise has to be heaped on the director, David Lowery, who put a lot of thought and contemplation into adapting a story that has been circulating for hundreds of years. Not only is there tact and poetry and beauty in the world he has created here, but all of it feels organic and authentic, and it really does feel like something that you would have read by Chaucer growing up. So when people ask, is The Green Knight good? The answer is yes. How good? I would say it's ultimately one of the best films of the year. I mean, as of right now, I think Pig is still my favorite, but The Green Knight is a wonderful picture that everybody should see. And despite the fact that there is some sexuality and some violence in it, I mean, I really do think it's one of those rare, R-rated films that really anybody can go see. And it's not going to scar you or fuck you up in the head any more than this review would.
Well, hey there. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to let us know by liking and subscribing so we can make sure you see our new videos in the future. In the meantime, why not go check out some of our other reviews, or some of our original content like Cold Flights, or the story of Russian director Larissa Shapitka. It ain't gonna hurt nothing. Go ahead. Please? Alright, have a good day.